Join the nation's top telecommunications leader, Cable Bahamas. Hear from our team as they share why this is the place for your next career move. Discover the future with us.
Hi, I'm Terrell Pinder, and we're here with Mr. Franklyn Butler, who is the president and group CEO of Cable Bahamas. How are you doing today?
I am fantastic and delighted to be here.
Awesome. Are you?
I am,
Awesome,
trust me.
awesome. Okay. So my first question for you is, I want you to tell me a little bit about your path, your career path that led you to Cable Bahamas.
Yeah, so really, I'm not a cable lifer. I really started as a employee of Milo Butler for my first job. While I did work at Cable Bahamas as a summer student many, many years ago, once I finished my degree, I came home and I worked in our family's business and really spent a lot of time understudying my father in our family business and was responsible really for, I guess, transitioning our family's business from G2, which is my father's generation, to G3. And so I led in the management transition and probably the shareholder transition as well, as my father and many of his siblings passed away. And so that for me was probably the most painful, rewarding experience that life ever gave me. And certainly I would encourage anybody, if you want to know more about that story, to tune into the Butler Legacy podcast on YouTube. Lots of great stories around that transition and families and business. But that's really what my background was. And so I did accounting and finance. And then once my father passed away, we were invited to join the board, or I was invited to join the board of Cable Bahamas. And I said, listen, I don't know anything about technology in this business, but Cable was going through its own transition where I think Columbus Communications had just sold its interest in the company, and they were looking for local shareholder representatives to sit on the board. And I volunteered. And so that's how I became initially a director of Cable Bahamas.
I love it. So you were a director for a while, but it still didn't mean that you had to join the team as an employer. So tell me about the leap to deciding that I'm going to actually be a part of the team full time.
Well, listen, becoming a team member was a very different experience. Initially, I was just a board member, and I remember I think I chaired the HR and Comp committee of the board as well. And for me, it was an opportunity for lifestyle. One, because I was incredibly young. I was probably 31, 32, maybe. And for me, I was literally just asking questions. I mean, technology at that time, if we think about WhatsApp, I don't think WhatsApp was as profound as it is today, just even 10 years ago.
No.
And so I was really, had an opportunity to engage with management quite a bit because I was local, and I would start to, management would reach out. I would reach out to them, they'd reach out to me. And they would just start to give me insights and say, are you aware of what's happening with the business in terms of this? They want to get your perspective on various different things. And then one thing led to the other. So there was certain things that I didn't understand. And so I'd be like, but how come we aren't discussing this at the board table if I'm 100% transparent? And then one day I literally went to one of the directors who is now the chairman of the business today, but wasn't the chairman of the business at the time. And I said, are you aware that this is going on? And if I'm 100% transparent, I was very nervous and anxious about it because this chairman, our current chairman, is a Canadian, and the one before that was a Canadian. And I was under the assumption, if I'm being 100% transparent, that these two Canadian brothers, they may be having conversations outside of the boardroom that I didn't know about. And so I just said, listen, let me reach out to this guy, have lunch, and said, are you aware that this was going on in business? And then that director said, no, I had no idea. And I said to him, I said, honestly, I thought you and maybe the former chairman were having these conversations. And so really through asking questions, they were like, listen, if these are issues that are going on in the business, are you prepared to give up like 3 days a week and come into the office as executive vice chairman and really to get a sense on really whether these issues are real or not? Because, as a director, it's what they say, eyes in, hands out. Nobody wanted to put their hands in too much because you really want to give management the opportunity. Mm-hmm. And I said, listen, I got a lot of responsibility in my family business. And I remember making that decision very hard. I think I turned it down initially. And it wasn't until like maybe the second or third time I decided, listen, I'll give it a go and come in an executive type role. And then I kind of just used that opportunity to sit in the business, talk to people. And at the time, culturally, people were like, what are you doing in the contact center? Like, executives don't go in the contact center. Like, what are you doing, like, connecting with us? Like, you're supposed to be on the third floor in your lofty office and not speak to us, right? And I don't say that to be funny, but I think that was very much the culture of the organization at the time. And then, I literally leveraged those questions and feedback from the team to really kind of get more and more involved, and that eventually is how I became kind of group CEO. We were launching Alive at the time, and I was very much involved in the conversations with the government around the license and what could happen with the model, etc. And one thing led to the next.
I love that because you saw that there were problems
Yep.
that needed to be fixed.
Absolutely.
And you realized that I could possibly be the solution. Not right away, you said no first, but then you realized I could possibly be the solution for that. And I think sometimes as entrepreneurs, you think about, I see a problem and I can provide the solution. But I think that there are persons who may be interested in being in the corporate world
Yep.
and realizing when I come into this organization, I'm not only coming in for my benefit, but there are problems that I may see that I can now be the solution to.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's really where I resolved in my own mind that, listen, that all the problems I have in the business, that I saw in the business, I was really the solution to. And I used to say when I first joined the business, because cable had a very strong culture, and it still does, to be very honest with you. And it was almost as if employees would say, listen, you will see. You'll soon get to understand, Mr. Butler. And even to this day, I tell people, my objective in this business is to change you before you change me.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me is around how do we think about accountability? How do I think about my role and my ability to influence you around your own personal development? And so literally this is about being the solution to the problems that you see. And so I think, I remember the first time I sat in a contact center, people asked me for like a chair. Oh, my chair hasn't changed in 5 years, or they wanted like a screen protector. Listen, maybe as an executive, a small thing, but for them and their work, a big deal.
Right.
And to be able to just send an email to somebody and say, listen, can we get a couple of screen protectors, or can we get a new chair for this employee? They're like, okay, you actually get stuff done. And so you keep building these trust currencies that eventually is, I hope, how I've been able to not only get the role, but get people to respect me in the role.
So I love what you said about being there in the call center and being able to have those conversations where persons felt heard.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, build trust currencies, because I think that's why they feel that they can trust you. So when you think about the culture that you guys have created, how would you describe it?
It's an evolving culture. I would be the first to say that, is everything right in Cable Bahamas? Absolutely not. But I do believe that people get a sense that we're committed to driving change in our organization, particularly from the inside out. And I would also say to you, Karel, in terms of the culture, we have really been focused on how do we invest in our people. I mean, that is something that, for me, I've been the beneficiary of. And so because I've been a beneficiary of it, I feel like I need others to benefit from it as well. And so a lot of what we have been trying to do as a leadership team has been about how are we investing in others. And when I joined the business, for example, we did not have any Bahamian leadership in engineering and technology of any real size. I mean, John Gomez was the VP of engineering. He eventually became the COO, and so that left a void. And so eventually we had to find, how do we create young Bahamians, or Bahamians who have the opportunity to do this? And that is really one of the things we continue to focus on. And technology is one of the things that it's just evolves so quickly. So if we think about AI and cybersecurity, do we have Bahamian excellence in these areas today? No. But I can tell you, from where we sit as leaders, we are committed to investing in making sure we do create Bahamians who have the technical expertise in these areas. And so this is why I say the culture is evolving. And so we are very much into educating, very much into giving our people an opportunity, bringing them along. I mean, that's always the tension that I have in the role as a CEO. People say, but why aren't we focused on strategy? I said, listen, if we're not executing well, how strategic can I really be? If I don't have people following me, where are we going? I'm going on my own and leaving nobody behind me to really kind of do the day-to-day execution. And so that's really where we are. And that's why I talk about our culture. Maybe from the outside in, it looks like a great culture, but it's an evolving culture and something that we are continuing to work at, so that at the end of the day, we make sure that not only I benefit as a leader, but that everybody who's a part of our team and our organization understands the role that they play, and they are benefiting as well and becoming their best selves.
Yeah, and I do think that there's a lot of strategic involved, because as you said, you recognize where the holes are. You looked at the board and there were not a lot of Bahamians in certain roles. And so we invest in training and education to make sure that they were placed into those roles. But you also said at the beginning that it's not perfect, and no organization is. So can you talk a little bit about some of the challenges that the team sometimes has?
So I think one of the biggest things we find culturally is accountability. if I talk about, one of the cultural viruses, as we call them, is for us, accountability is something that I'm really try to be big on. But what I find is people want a policeman. And I keep telling people, I'm not here to be a policeman. What I want you to be able to do without somebody saying, oh, you're throwing me under the bus, because that's often the culture that you get from your colleagues is, oh, you're throwing me under the bus. But no, sometimes we do need to have the honest conversation about the fact that you disappointed me when you did not execute on project X, Y, and Z. And in fact, the more we have those conversations in a candid, respectful way, the better chance you have to be a better leader, and also the better chance I have to look like a better leader. Mm-hmm. Because the better you become as an individual, the better the organization is going to perform. But oftentimes we think having those difficult conversations is throwing someone under the bus. Inevitably, Corella will tell you what I have found in my own experience is when we have those difficult conversations, trust is built. When you can call out somebody and say, hey, man, listen, I know you're working hard. I know you're putting your best foot forward. But I can tell you, when you don't meet this timeline, when you don't execute what you say you're going to do, really what it does, it erodes my trust. And it does not give me the confidence. And in fact, I feel like I have to micromanage because you haven't done X, Y, and Z, or I feel like I have to go above you. And this allows your VP not to be able to do the best work that they could do because I got to manage upward and around you as opposed to through you. And so that's really where I think, we are evolving. And really, when I talk about trust currencies in the first instance, in the context of a chair, we are still building trust currencies. When it comes now to people issues and performance, trust is built, but it's much more uncomfortable.
Yeah, because you have to have those hard conversations. So I'm going to have a hard conversation. Did you ever can you remember in your time of working, and it could have been with cable or before, that someone had to have a hard conversation with you?
Absolutely. I just told you, I came out of family business. Hard conversations are a way of life in a family business. And I say that in all sincerity, because ultimately I'll share the story in terms of the context of our own family business. I came in there and I was ready to kind of like, how can we build? How can we expand? How can we do this? But in our context, we'd just gone from G2 to G3, a whole generation different. And I'll share a little bit of the insights around that, because my father always used to say to us, we have to postpone gratification. And when you build a family on the culture of postponing gratification, here's the number one question. When does the gratification begin? Mm-hmm. And what I found in my own journey is when we transitioned from G2 to G3, in that transition is, in some people's mind, when the gratification should begin. For me, I'm like, listen, no, I want postponed gratification just like Daddy did. And people are saying, no, I need to live. I have responsibilities. I need to connect. And so I can tell you, I know very much about many shareholder meetings, one-on-one conversations in my own personal development, where I had to appreciate that someone else had a different perspective that I needed to incorporate in my day-to-day performance to make sure I met their needs, because they are no less valued than me, because they had a need today that I did not necessarily have.
What I love about what you shared just now is that it's what helped you to be able to have those hard conversations. I think when people understand that the leaders that are ahead of me, they had to have hard conversations to become the leaders they are today. When someone has a hard conversation with you, you're going to be able to use it in the future to propel you in your career. So we talked about challenging times. I want you to share something that you love about working with the team.
I generally love people. I tell people, like, if I walk into a room and there's someone who has an issue or a conflict, that does not scare me. Because fundamentally, I think I'm at the point, and maybe I'm not 100%, but I think I try to be fairly clear about who I am. And I try to be fairly clear about the expectations I want from our people. And I accept, Corel, that sometimes I may have an expectation for somebody that they don't necessarily have for themselves. But that's okay. Because my hope is, even taking them through that process, one day they will have an appreciation for it. And here's how that shows up for me today in my everyday life. My wife often says, we go to dinner, we go to a restaurant, I go to the police station even. And I meet a guy or I meet a female who worked with me at some point in my life. And they come up to me and say, hey, Mr. Butler, how are you? I said, thank you for what I did. Literally just this week, I was walking the halls of the office at CBL Bahamas, and a young lady stopped me. And you know what she said? My daddy is so-and-so, so-and-so, and he said to tell you hello. He used to work with you at Milo Butler & Sons. Now, that's great. But I assure you, Karel, that many of those people who come today and tell me hello, whether that's in the police station, in a restaurant working, not only are they telling me hello, but I probably had a hard conversation that resulted in probably even their termination. That today, they look at me when I'm with my wife and with my daughter, and they say, hey, Mr. B, I have the greatest regard for you. Because of what you did for me and the conversations that we had together, I am now the policeman. I am now in charge of the bar at this restaurant or establishment. I'm now able to take those same principles of accountability and apply them to my life. And that is like the most rewarding experience that life could ever give you.
So you're basically like a mentor. And just from some of the conversations we had already, I can see how mentorship is a big part of what Cable Bahamas is about when it comes to the leaders and how you want to pour back into your team members. So when you think about future team members, who are some team members, the kind of qualities you're trying to attract?
So I recently had this conversation with somebody who stopped me in the office. And I said to him, listen, tell me, what do you want out of this job? And inevitably, that's the first thing I ask most people. What is it that you want? Because oftentimes employees think it's about what I want or what we want as an organization. And I make the point because I will always hire an employee, whether they are fresh out of high school, who is committed to being a doctor, but wants to work at Cable Bahamas or any organization that I'm involved in, because they want to become that doctor, they need a salary. I'd rather hire them than to hire somebody who is unclear on who they are. And here's why. If you're committed to becoming a doctor, lawyer, whatever your profession is, but you see my job as a means to an end, I am more likely, in my view, to get more out of you because you have clarity of who you are and what you want from me. And so I have found that the best summer students are those who know exactly what they want. They know that they are on a long march to becoming the best lawyer in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And so they are more likely to give me more time, not less. There's assumption because, I want to be a lawyer and I got to be in school and I got to do the things that they give you less time. I have found that they are more committed in every aspect of their life, not just when it comes to the role that they play at Cable Bahamas. So I use that as a starting point, but I find the same is true for every employee. Jobs are only a means to an end. Absolutely, there are people who become lifers. When I say lifers, the job is they become a professional, they stay with a company forever. Cable has many great examples of that. But the number one question for every employee is, who are you? What is it that this job is fulfilling in you that allows you to do your best work as an individual? And that is the perspective that I often take every time I'm looking for an employee. Show me, demonstrate to me, what is it that you are going to get out of this? Because then if I know what you're getting out of this, I know exactly what to pour into you.
That is so good. Because as you said, there's some lifers that are there. But if you're honest and open about this generation, millennials, Gen Zs, what they're thinking about is, how is this going to help me towards the end game for them? And the end game for some is an executive level.
Absolutely.
And the end game for some may be a lawyer or maybe a business owner. But as you said, they're going to be more productive when they come in if they're clear and they're transparent to know that you really want to know what I want to do, so you can really know how I can contribute and be productive, and then you can pour into me as well.
But here's my view. An executive level is not who you are. Mm-hmm. That is a position. The question I'm asking is, who are you? Mm-hmm. As an executive, I was just telling somebody this week who was a colleague of mine at the executive level, that at the end of the day, we have to evolve even as executives. If Franklyn Butler is not evolving every 2 or 3 years, then how am I pouring into my people? Mm. So listen, the world's changed now. We're talking about AI, we're talking about cybersecurity, we're talking about all these things. I got to evolve as a CEO. I mean, how am I going to get people into AI, and how am I going to leverage AI in the context of it? And we got a contact center. I mean, around the world, I tell people all the time, why do people trust Amazon for customer service where you go into a chatbot? You're not talking to somebody, but you feel you got to call the contact center agent at Cable Bahamas. There's a gap between where we are and people's expectations when they use Amazon, for example, for customer support. Our mission's got to be not necessarily to get to the Amazon position, but how do we draw closer? Because that is a cost disadvantage. That is a skills gap, if you put it in its purest context. And if we're not catching up and keeping up with the world, ultimately, the end result is pretty clear what happens if we don't bridge that gap. That is my mission, even though I appreciate that AI and all of its advancements can create a level of job insecurity, fear, all those things. But that's why I want my people to think about it in advance. I don't want them to be a victim of it.
Right.
I want them to be advocates in their career and thinking about, listen, I got to jump on the bus to get on this because AI ain't gonna steal my job. An employee using AI will.
I love how you were able to bridge the gap between technology and employees and how employees can bring that technology to fruition. One of the other things that I admire about your time at Cable is that we've seen equity with women rise. There are more women in leadership than ever before. So when you think about your time at Cable Bahamas, what is the most satisfying experience you've had being the president and CEO?
When we live our mission, which is to be the leader enabling connected lifestyles and experiences. In Dorian, we did exactly that. We stepped into what was a crisis situation. Obviously, everybody knows the story of Dorian, but we made sure that we enabled people to live a connected lifestyle. In Abaco, our network came on the fastest. In Grand Bahama, we never went down. And that is really what our mission is. We don't get to do that every day. But what motivates me, what is my ambition in life and in this role right now, is to make sure that whether you have a live on the mobile side or whether you have our live fiber service on the home side, that you are able to connect to our customers. And I can tell you that if you haven't signed up for live fiber, you are missing out. Because I can assure you that once our team executes it well, which we're working on every single day, I can tell you that your level of connectivity, your experience, your ability to work from home, your ability to watch, stream the greatest movies as much as you want, you have that ability on our live fiber platform. And when we do that well, Karel, there's no greater satisfaction in the world for me as the CEO of Cable Bahamas. And so living our vision and our mission is really what gets me up every single morning. And my hope over the remaining tenure of my role at Cable is to make sure we can bring that being the leader in enabling connected lifestyles and experiences to life.
I love that. I love that. So this is my final question for you. How do you find work-life harmony? You have this big role, president, group CEO. How do you find work-life harmony?
All titles. Those are all titles. Harmony? I don't know. I would say to you, it's definitely about integration. So in my case, in the role that I have, when I'm on vacation, do I work? Absolutely. But also, when I'm at work and my daughter calls and says, Daddy, I need you to be at school to do whatever, I make no apologies. I will miss the executive meeting, not often. I will leave at 3 o'clock to make sure I'm there to collect her. I always, except for Thursday mornings when I have executive meetings, take her to school. I pray with her because her and my wife, they are my priorities. So it's very rare that I don't take those calls, even though I have all those titles and I'm in the role that I'm in, because those are the things and people that matter the most to me.
And I think that's beautiful when team members know that their leaders prioritize their family and are still able to pour into their work because it gives them permission to pour into their family and still have a meaningful work.
Absolutely. But I will say this, it takes time. A lot of people feel guilty for putting that. But I always tell people, if you figure out what your priorities are, and so I had to figure out with my wife is not a morning person, I'm a morning person. So I dropped my daughter to school. And so I just changed my calendar that I don't take appointments before 9 o'clock. It just doesn't happen. If I'm in the car with my daughter, I do not take a call. Now, are there exceptions? Yes, but very, very, very few exceptions to that rule. And I encourage all of our executives to think that way. Again, my view is, if you don't know who you are and what you bring to the table, how dare I serve Cable Bahamas? Because the more you know who you are and what matters to you, the more you will serve me with distinction and honor. And I apply that to myself because I want to apply that to everybody in our organization.
I love it. I love it. Well, I say thank you so much for this conversation, and thank you guys for tuning in.